Professor, thank you very much again for joining us for this chat. The idea really is to just go through the subject of the survey, that's been sent out to seafarers, South African seafarers in particular. I think, crucially, maybe we need to just clarify a few things. For example, I think that maybe we need to start talking about who is a seafarer. What is the official definition? Who are we talking about here when we say seafarers?
So the term seafarer is quite a broad term, and it's quite inclusive of a range of people that work on seagoing vessels in a range of different sectors. So, for example, I think the term would include employees working on vessels as large as cargo vessels, to employees working on, say, yachts or small fishing boats. However, for purposes of the survey, a seafarer is understood to be someone who's working on a large cargo vessel or cruise vessel or working vessel, other than a fishing vessel or a, say, tugboat or small vessel. So we're really interested for the survey in sailors or seafarers that are working on large vessels that are responsible for the distribution or transport of cargo. So we would exclude, for example, say the Navy. We would exclude small operational vessels. So the term seafarer is broad. It would encompass, as I've said, a range of workers on a range of vessels, but we can then narrow it down further to for purposes of the survey. I'm not sure if that assists.
It definitely does, sir. Thank you so much. What is your estimation of the number of South Africans plying their trade as seafarers, specifically in the category that you've mentioned?
So the category that I've mentioned, which would be sort of cargo vessels or the merchant navy, we're looking at about 4,500 seafarers, South African seafarers, not all of whom will be employed at the same time, but that is approximately the number. The registrar or the official database is very difficult to administer because many seafarers will work for 3 months at a time. Some may work for 9 months. Some may be officially credentialed as seafarers, but not be working on ships. But broadly and with some confidence, we can say there are about 4,500 South African seafarers. So to put that in perspective, in the 1970s, we had over 7,000. So the numbers have definitely declined many years later, many decades later. But to answer your question simply, about 4,000 to 4,500 South African seafarers are currently registered to work on ships.
Professor, tell me, are South African seafarers mostly employed in South Africa, or are they spread across the world?
So the nature of the shipping industry is global. So I would say they spread globally. So South Africa doesn't really have a large ship registry, meaning that the number of ships that are flagged to South Africa is negligible. I think there might be 2 at the moment. It used to be much higher when submarine ships were all flagged in South Africa. So they're a global workforce. So they would work on ships that are registered or owned by many countries, from countries in Asia and Europe, for example. So very much part of a global workforce. So even though their nationality is South Africa, they definitely spread throughout the world.
Well, reaching as many as 4,000 seafarers spread across the world could could be time consuming. In other words, you might need more time. Are there organizations in South Africa for seafarers that you have spoken to?
So from that 4,500, we estimate about 1,300 were officially involved in the repatriation program. In other words, about 1,300 were during the COVID pandemic were repatriated back to South Africa. So they would have been stuck in ports around the world and needed to come back. So that helps us narrow it down a little bit. But you're right. So the one organization I think that is central to our outreach and distribution of the survey is SAMHSA. I think SAMHSA does amazing work in sort of keeping tabs on South African seafarers, in servicing them, in maintaining the register, and so on. We've also approached seafarer welfare organizations like the Mission to Seafarers, for example. And then we've reached out to some crewing agencies, but it can be difficult because, as you mentioned, the global spread is so wide that we can't just go on a sort of fishing expedition, excuse the pun, to try and target a range of organizations. So for the moment, it's SAMHSA, the Mission to Seafarers, and about 2 or 3 crewing agencies that we know have a track record of hiring South African seafarers. So we're hoping that those organizations will help us reach as many seafarers as possible. Of course, the ideal is to reach the full population, but that is probably not feasible. So we will, I think, settle for the highest number that we can reach, given that we can't keep the survey open, forever.
That's wonderful, sir. Now, I think we need to talk about the survey itself. What exactly is it seeking to establish?
So the survey is seeking, I think, to establish 3 things. The main purpose is to understand the impact of the COVID pandemic on South African seafarers' well-being. And we're particularly interested in their psychological, emotional, and physical well-being. And we want to measure their or assess their experience of the pandemic on those dimensions of their well-being. So interestingly enough, during the height of the pandemic last year, there was a range of research and even in the media and the press on remote working and the impact on workers' mental health. And these were land-based workers, right? Sort of like white-collar workers, professional workers, and so on. And there was a lot of emphasis even on the aviation industry. But the maritime industry and seafarers were sort of invisible to this whole debate. It was almost like they didn't exist. And I think what the survey is trying to do is say that seafarers and the maritime industry is the backbone of our national and global economy. And we really do need to understand how this category of workers has been impacted emotionally, physically, mentally by the pandemic. So, for example, the survey focuses on something called the impact of major events on people's working lives. So we use a scale called the impact of event scale. Now, the impact of event scale measures people's responses to traumatic events. So those traumatic events could be, a natural disaster, for example. But in this instance, we've adapted it to apply to COVID. So we very much want to know, well, what was happening on the actual ships? How were seafarers processing their colleagues being sick, being away from families for extended periods of time, managing work-life balance, dealing with relationships, working relationships during this time of high uncertainty. So the first part of the survey asks seafarers for their demographics. So what vessels are they sailing on, their gender, how long their contracts are. So it gives us, so we get a sense of the actual seafarer that is filling in that survey at that time. Then the second half of the survey asks questions around their experience of work during COVID and their responses to it. So how did they respond in terms of motivation? How did they respond in terms of coping strategies? What did they feel they could have done better, or how could organizations have supported them better? So it's about a 6 to, I would say, 8-minute survey, but it really does try to assess the impact of the pandemic on the emotional, physical, and mental well-being of seafarers during a very difficult time.
Professor, the University of KwaZulu-Natal is one of the leading universities in terms of the scientific approach to COVID-19. But I think the question arises, what will be the purpose of the finding in terms of the survey? What are you seeking to establish exactly, and how will this information be utilized to what end?
So I think the first purpose is to make this category of workers and this category of the economy visible, to say that South African seafarers are very important to us. And there's a debate happening at the moment about whether seafarers should be classified as essential workers or even frontline workers. So I think the first purpose is to try and bring some publicity and attention to South African seafarers and the South African maritime sector to the general public. So the outcome of the survey is not just going to be published in some academic journal that very few people read, but we hope to actually bring it to the general public's knowledge or distribution to the general public through popular forms of media, maybe, so they understand that how essential this category of workers is. So that's the first purpose. I think the second purpose, in terms of what it brings to seafarers themselves and employers of seafarers, is to say, well, this has been, whatever the findings show, this has been the experience of South African seafarers, and there is some potential based on these findings to feed into potential policy interventions. So at this point, it might be COVID, but down the line, we know we're going to experience other profound types of social and economic change that we can't predict. And how might shipping companies or maritime organizations and seafarers themselves develop strategies based on our findings that suggest new ways of coping or effective ways of coping that protect them from these events. So we can't always predict what these sort of life-changing events may be, but I think we can, based on the evidence of surveys like this, better prepare ourselves. So we're looking at sort of suggesting potential policy changes. What are the interventions that seafarers need, not just at the organizational level, but at the personal level? So should we be looking at, for example, if the findings suggest that seafarers need one-on-one counseling, if they need support groups, if they need a forum to openly express what their experiences have been, I think those will be helpful findings. And whilst it may seem like common sense, I think the point of doing a survey is to actually have the evidence to say, look, this is what the evidence suggests that will make for a happier, more productive workforce. Because remember, at the height of the pandemic, up to 500,000 seafarers around the world were stranded, far from home. So it's really important that we have an evidence-based survey that suggests to employers, but also to seafarers themselves, how best they can strategize and inform potential policy to develop coping strategies. And I think for organizations like SAMHSA and other types of seafaring organizations, it sort of gives them, I think, an edge in terms of actually having evidence rather than just doing guesswork.
Absolutely. I do know that SAMHSA is very, very supportive of this initiative for a whole range of reasons, including those that you have mentioned. The survey has been running for close on a week now. I think it launched about 10 days or so ago. And you did indicate that it's not going to run forever, but what would be a realistic period that you think you may be able to get responses from the 4,500 seafarers?
So given the nature of seafaring work and that seafarers may be on vessels, they may have limited internet connectivity and so on, I think we want to keep it open for a month. So we've been averaging on about 10 responses on a slow day, and then on a very good day in terms of responses, we get up to 30 responses. So that's actually considered quite good in terms of survey research. We're not too concerned if we don't reach the whole population. As long as we have a representative sample of that population size. Ideally, we want to keep it open for at least a month to reach as many seafarers as possible. And we estimate that should be sufficient time. Obviously, if we reach more people or more seafarers before then, that's great. The danger of leaving it open beyond then is that we sort of lag behind in actually presenting the results.
Professor Roganan, I think you are doing wonderful work, and I think my own organization, SAMHSA, is really very keen in supporting this work. I thank you very much, sir, for taking time to actually explain what this is about, because it is a serious exercise and it is a very important exercise. So thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.